The forbidden love between teacher and student, a tragic unfolding of events. This is the first time in American criminal cases that the trial was broadcast live in its entirety. Every audience member wanted to know the final outcome, whether the individuals involved were victims or the masterminds behind the case. Today's case shocked America at the time. It involved a marriage, a love affair, a lie, and a tragedy. Even though the court reached a judgment, the truth seemed even more elusive. How many dirty secrets did they have between them? Hello, welcome to the Crime Documentary Files channel. On May 1st, 1990, a horrible incident shattered the tranquility of Derry, New Hampshire. Pamela sprinted towards the neighbor's house, banging frantically on the door, then collapsed on the ground, crying hysterically. When the neighbors asked what had happened, Pamela couldn't articulate herself properly and pointed towards her own home. A few minutes later, police officers arrived to find Pamela sitting on the neighbor's steps, trembling all over. As she looked up at the officers trying to calm herself, she told them there was a burglar in her home. The officers immediately armed themselves and cautiously approached the scene. Upon opening the door, there was no movement inside, but at the end of the first-floor corridor lay a man. Pamela, standing behind the officers, immediately let out a scream, "Oh my God, that's my husband Gregory!" The police officers immediately called an ambulance, but it was already too late. The room looked messy, with items that were originally on the table scattered all over the floor. The drawers of the wardrobe were all open, and Pamela quickly realized that her jewelry was missing. Strangely, there were no signs of forced entry, just the back door open. It was uncertain whether the burglars forgot to close it while escaping, or if the door was originally left open, giving them an opportunity to break in. Additionally, the police's response time was 10 p.m. Burglars normally wouldn't choose to take the risk at this time because most people are not asleep yet. Considering Pamela was emotionally unstable, the detectives started to question the neighbors first. The neighbors mentioned that only the young couple, Pamela and Gregory, lived in the house. Pamela, the teacher, was born and raised in Miami. Her father was a pilot and her mother was a housewife. When Pamela was in 8th grade, the family moved to this state and settled not far from the crime scene. Pamela was an outgoing person and had a wide range of interests. She was a cheerleading captain in high school and dabbled in heavy metal music after enrolling in a university in Florida. She also became a radio host on campus. During Christmas in 1986, Pamela returned from Florida and met Gregory at a party. He was handsome and had long hair. They fell in love at first sight, and their relationship quickly blossomed. Gregory followed Pamela to Florida, and they finally moved back to this state after Pamela graduated in 1988. Pamela applied for a job in the university's administration department, mainly organizing social events and external communications. Later, she also started her own photography course, teaching students how to use photography equipment for video production. Gregory then started working in insurance sales and even shaved off his long hair, as everything gradually fell into place. On May 7, 1989, 21-year-old Pamela and 23-year-old Gregory officially got married. They moved into the scene of today's crime, appearing to be a harmonious couple and even planning to have a child in the near future. It was only 6 days until their first wedding anniversary at this point, and they had been hosting parties every now and then to celebrate in the recent weeks. All the parties were lively, and nobody expected the sudden accident involving Gregory. Around 2 a.m. on May 2, 1990, about 4 hours after the incident, Pamela said she could now control her emotions and needed to talk to a detective. Even though this was beyond the police's working hours, the detectives did not refuse, hoping to solve the case quickly. Pamela said that she went to school early on May 1st for an administrative meeting she had to attend. She called her husband Gregory around 3 p.m., telling him she needed to work late that evening and that he should sort out dinner himself. Pamela got off work around 9 p.m. and arrived home around 10. There were no lights on at the house, which was very unusual. She remembered that the front door was unlocked. When she pushed the door open, she saw a figure at the end of the corridor and found the living room in a mess. Realizing that her home had been burgled, she couldn't tell if the culprit was still in the house, so she quickly ran to the neighbor for help. She was extremely scared, and her mind was blank. When the detective asked if the figure she saw was her husband lying down, Pamela replied without hesitation that she felt he had been hit by something. The detective then asked if she thought the burglar could be someone they knew, or if they knew Gregory. Pamela thought for a moment and said her husband was into gambling, but whether this had led to debts was unknown. The conversation ended after an hour, and the detective asked Pamela to go back and rest properly, suggesting that she could stay with her parents as it was safer. On May 4th, 3 days after the incident, Gregory's funeral took place as scheduled. Pamela broke down once again, needing to be held up by her mother and sister as she left the church. The whole community showed up that day, feeling sorry and wondering who the perpetrator could be. The detectives visited Pamela a second time later. They mentioned that this case was quite peculiar. The crime scene was a mess, but Gregory's wallet and credit cards were still at home. His wedding ring was also left untouched, which is not typical of a robbery. According to the forensic examination, Gregory's main cause of death was a .38 caliber bullet to his head, leading to speculation that the motive was personal rather than financial gain. Over the past 2 days, the police have investigated Gregory's connections, including his gambling and other activities, but have not found anything suspicious. Pamela was somewhat resistant to this. She said she believed in her own eyes and intuition, and the police investigation showed no underlying motive behind the murder of Gregory, which meant it was an unplanned burglary. The reason the thief did not take the money and escaped quickly was that she happened to return home at that time. After leaving the police station, Pamela immediately called a local station and told the reporters that she was willing to be interviewed. 5 days after the incident, on May 6th, Pamela was interviewed at home by the station. She looked well presented and dressed beautifully. After briefly describing her and her husband's past, she went to the kitchen, took out a very delicate cake from the refrigerator, and suddenly smashed it with a fork, choking up as she spoke to the camera. On this day, a year ago, I was facing one of the happiest days of my life at the beginning of our future together. And today, I have to wake up and realize that there is no future for us. There's a future for me, but not for us. After seeing the news, the detectives warned Pamela that she shouldn't be impulsive, as it could tip the criminals off. But Pamela believed that the detectives were trying to cover up the case, and the only way for her to pressure the police was by speaking up. 2 weeks after the incident, on May 14, 1990, the police received an anonymous call from someone claiming to work at an Italian restaurant. They overheard their part-time colleague Cecilia and her friends discussing a plot where a woman was trying to kill her husband. This Cecilia happened to be Pamela's student. A week later, the detectives visited Cecilia at her home in a rather run-down town. Cecilia, being 15 years old, was accompanied by her parents throughout the conversation. She explained that she had chosen Pamela's photography course in 1989, dreaming of becoming a journalist. Cecilia was fascinated by the young and beautiful Pamela, as well as her rich life experiences and in-depth knowledge of communication studies. But she did not understand the plot at all. Cecilia stayed at Pamela's house for a week at the end of April and was well taken care of by Pamela and her husband. This piece of information caught the attention of the investigators. On the second day of the incident, the investigators requested Pamela to list all the people who had entered her house in the past 2 weeks so that they could collect fingerprints at the scene to eliminate unrelated individuals during their investigation. Pamela listed many names, even the names of the water delivery personnel, but Cecilia's name was not on the list. Did Pamela forget, or was she intentionally hiding something? After they returned to the police station, the investigators began their work. They wanted to know if the anonymous informant was causing trouble or if Cecilia was lying. Another 2 weeks passed. On June 10th, a middle-aged man walked into the police station. His name was Latime, and he claimed that he was in trouble. His son's friend told him that it was his gun from the cabinet that killed Gregory. He didn't believe it, so he checked it. The gun barrel was very clean, which was unusual since he usually fired a few shots for fun and never bothered to clean it. The barrel should have been dirty. He brought the weapon with him that day, hoping the police could investigate and clear his name, as he did not want to end up in jail for something he didn't do. The detectives carefully inspected the weapon and confirmed that its caliber ballistics matched those found at the crime scene. They were curious as to why Latime's son's friend would know about this, so they found the informant. The informant said he was friends with Latime's son Junior and 2 other local boys, Pete and Billy. He was very worried about these 3 because they often went against the rules. After he heard about the incident involving Miss Pamela's husband, he unintentionally overheard Junior saying he had cleaned up the tools. Therefore, he suspected this matter was related to Junior and his friends. The detectives were alarmed immediately, as Junior, Pete and Billy were still very young. Did they understand the consequences of their actions? Furthermore, Junior and Billy happened to be Pamela's students. Was there any secret among them? On June 11th, the media was tipped off and pointed their fingers at the 3 ignorant young men. Due to their age, the police kept the names of the 3 individuals confidential at that time and did not inform Pamela of anything. Pamela was extremely anxious, starting to ask around and beginning to complain that as a victim she was not getting first-hand details of the case. Perhaps Pamela had not yet realized that the police were deliberately avoiding her because while she was a victim, her behavior was puzzling. Her initial reaction after entering the crime scene was to flee, and when she voluntarily came in for questioning in the middle of the night, despite being emotional, she could still vividly describe everything that happened on the day of the incident, down to every single detail. Not even a week after the incident, she was frequently in the spotlight of the media, trying to craft an image of a broken woman. Throughout the entire process, she repeatedly emphasized that everything was done by the burglars. Afterwards, she immediately took out her husband's life insurance totaling $140,000. Her husband was only 24 years old. How many people buy life insurance at such a young age? Even more suspicious was the intricate connection between the reported Cecilia, the 3 young men suspected of handling weapons, and Pamela. The families of the 3 young men had hired lawyers for them. During questioning, they all remained silent, so the detectives were trying to figure out where the breakthrough could be. They called Cecilia's mother, and frankly said that Cecilia was classmates with the young men. If they knew something and decided not to speak out now, it would be too late once the truth came to light. The mother understood what the detectives meant. The next afternoon, she accompanied her daughter to the police station. Cecilia admitted to having a close relationship with these 3 boys. Pamela was their mentor, who had taken them to shoot an advertisement for orange juice. She said that if the ad became popular, she would reward them with a trip to Disneyland, which was a huge incentive for young people in the small town. During this period, Billy and Pamela got closer. Cecilia saw them being intimate more than once. She couldn't remember the exact time, but Pamela once said, "Okay, kill my husband," and then the incident really happened. Cecilia called Pamela in front of the detectives, trying to find out who the killer was, or to make Pamela confess that she was the mastermind behind everything. However, Pamela was cautious on the phone and did not fall for the trap. The detective asked Cecilia to wear a listening device and go directly to Pamela's office to get her to speak in a private setting. Cecilia was very nervous. On July 12th, she walked into Pamela's office, but because the signal wasn't stable, there was an issue with the device. Luckily, there was a backup recorder still functioning. Eventually, the police issued an arrest warrant for Pamela based on one sentence. She said, "Can this sentence ultimately convict her?" 3 months after the case occurred in August 1st, 1991, Pamela was handcuffed. 2 weeks later, she was formally charged. Overnight, she went from a sad victim to a black widow. The media dug up more dirty secrets, saying that Pamela sent a seductive photo of herself in a white bikini to her student, Billy, which caused his downfall. In March 4th, 1992, 10 months after Gregory was killed, the trial with the 5 individuals involved started. The media requested full live coverage, and the judge agreed. This was unprecedented at the time, and the public was eager to find out the extent of their evil plot. The prosecution pointed out that the mastermind behind the heinous crime was Pamela. She used her identity as a teacher to get close to and successfully seduce a naive and impulsive student, Billy, who was 7 years younger than her. After engaging in the twisted relationship, Pamela instigated Billy to get rid of her husband. Billy involved 2 of his buddies, promising each $500 after the deed. However, Billy did not come from a rich family, and $1,000 was a large sum for him. Where did his money come from? Later, all 3 confessed at the end of January that they were tricked by the teacher. They claimed the entire incident was the most vivid lesson given by Pamela. The defense, however, smirked, saying things were not that simple. The prosecutor deliberately moved the cases of the 3 boys to adult court, indicating they would face sanctions beyond their age protection. However, at this time, the prosecutor also proposed a plea agreement that not only exempted them from the death penalty, but also set a maximum of 40 years of imprisonment. If they behaved well, they could be paroled after 12 years. This was actually a trap, an unfair trade, and the goal was to get Pamela convicted. According to the private detective's investigation, the criminal records of these 3 boys regarding juvenile delinquency were deliberately concealed. In fact, they had long been problematic and had committed robbery and burglary, so wasn't it kind of a joke to accuse an educated female teacher? Moreover, they had no substantial evidence. The prosecution stated that the 3 boys pleaded guilty without any dispute, and their accounts of the incident were exactly the same, so these testimonies were all legal and valid. Junior testified in court that he was supposed to go to the rental company to rent a car as planned with his grandmother that day, but his grandmother forgot about it, so it was Pamela who drove him to get the car. His accomplice Pete was also there, and on the way Pamela even mentioned having white furniture at home and using a gun to avoid dirtying the carpet. The defense attorney then asked Junior who he said goodnight to last night before going to bed, and who he said good morning to early today. Junior replied it was Pete and Billy, who were in the adjacent cell. The defense attorney caught onto this point, noting that during the months of detention, they could have easily colluded to fabricate a flawless story. At this moment, the suspect Billy appeared in court. He claimed to have met Pamela during a photography project at school. Pamela liked rock and heavy metal music, which was also Billy's interest. They started talking and got to know each other. Around February 1990, 3 months before the incident, Pamela had Cecilia pass him a note, and they had a secret meeting. Pamela asked, "Don't you want to kiss me?" Billy blushed, leaned in, and kissed her. Over the following weeks, Pamela would take Billy to watch explicit videos and pose seductively in a bathrobe. Pamela was the first woman in Billy's life. The next day, Pamela asked Billy to take care of her husband, saying that only by doing so could they be together and inherit everything, including the house, car, and insurance. On the day of the incident, Pamela intentionally left the back gate of the backyard open before leaving home. Billy and Pete followed the plan. Since Gregory was not at home at that time, they opened the drawer, took some jewelry, messed up the house as much as possible, then hid quietly behind the gate, waiting for Gregory to return home. Upon Gregory's arrival, Junior and Peter rushed out to beat him up. Then Billy himself pulled the trigger, using the gun stolen from Junior's father. Afterwards, someone named Raymond drove them away. To make Billy's testimony more credible, the prosecutor also had Cecilia testify. Cecilia admitted that Pamela and Billy initially communicated through her. Pamela wrote in a letter, "Do you miss me? I think of you all the time." Cecilia witnessed inappropriate behavior between the two individuals in different settings multiple times. Pamela suggested doing things to her husband, which Cecilia thought was a joke. When Billy asked if she could help obtain a weapon, she even suggested something. Fortunately, it did not succeed. The prosecution summed up at this point, saying Pamela brainwashed Billy with her body, causing him to lose his way and ultimately be completely controlled by her, which was the most terrifying part of this case. The defense attorney strongly objected to this conclusion, acknowledging that Pamela did indeed cross boundaries with Billy, but Pamela had already proposed a breakup with Billy, and it was Billy who couldn't let go, hence planning the murder of Pamela's husband. Furthermore, Cecilia had a unique position in the case. Her attire during the trial was paid for by the government, so was her testimony also serving the government's interest. Cecilia claimed that she thought it was all a joke, yet she mentioned to Billy about an elderly couple at her workplace. The wife said she didn't like the weapons bought by her husband because they didn't feel right. So she always kept the weapons in her car and never carried them with her. Billy deliberately inquired about the type of car and its parking location and went to investigate. Fortunately, that day the husband had removed the weapons, proving that Cecilia's testimony was inconsistent. Why didn't she report to the police earlier? Because she was also afraid. She was an accomplice, and now she's shifting all the blame onto Pamela, trying to avoid jail time. The prosecution disclosed a segment of highly suspicious dialogue that Pamela uttered when Cecilia brought listening devices to her after the incident. Professional audio technicians transcribed this segment and distributed it to the judge and jury. Everyone read the transcript first and then listened to the recording. What Pamela said could be vaguely identified.
You cannot change what you know. And if you tell the truth, you're probably going to be arrested. And if you're not arrested, you're going to have to go and you're going to have to go to jail. You're going to have to go to jail. You're going to have to go to the landlord for the rest of our entire life. And unfortunately,
prosecution finally revealed that Pamela had disclosed her husband Gregory's affair, which her husband himself admitted, and begged Pamela to forgive him, promising such things would not happen again. Therefore, it could be implied that Pamela wanted revenge because of her husband's infidelity. The defense claimed that the audio had been processed by experts, but there was still significant noise interference intermittently. Moreover, this statement was out of context, and the transcriber likely listened to this recording with bias, so this recording was entirely insufficient to convict, and the reasoning for retaliating against the husband is purely hypothetical. Both defense and prosecution stuck to their guns, with no one willing to give in. Finally, Pamela made her appearance. She said that everyone in the room was viewing her with biases, but did anyone know that she was once on the edge of a mental breakdown, wailing and sobbing uncontrollably while sitting vigil, and even briefly suspecting her own student of orchestrating everything after hearing a news report? So, when she spoke with Cecilia that day, she pretended to know everything. She wanted to trick Cecilia into confessing, but her approach inadvertently offended the prosecution. Their selective use of information caused her harm for the second time. They were a group, while she fought alone. After 11 days of trial, the jury reached a verdict after less than 3 days of deliberation, finding Pamela guilty of plotting and being an accomplice in the murder, as well as interference with a witness. With 3 convictions, Pamela and her family could not bear it, as she was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Her life has been changed forever. Up until today, Pamela has yet to confess, enduring high levels of anxiety and vigilance in prison. Suffering from facial nerve damage inflicted by a fellow inmate in 1996, she has to take medication daily, especially during rainy or snowy weather when the pain intensifies. Despite her circumstances, she has earned 2 master's degrees in literature and legal studies in prison and has applied to become a member of an international women's organization aspiring to advocate for the rights of incarcerated women. In the meantime, the group of students were all eventually released one by one. Jania and Pete were granted parole in 2005 and 2015 respectively. Billy, the one who pulled the trigger, obtained a degree in prison and got a job as a prison electrician. He too was granted parole in 2015, 25 years after the incident. Pamela's response was that she understood these students, but she would never forgive them. These individuals, in order to escape punishment, framed an innocent teacher. The entire story has become too hard to untangle now. When it comes to both the collective and individual, students and teacher, who would you choose to believe?